So Hamish, one of the things that often people find helpful is to have a framework or an understanding for how the body works to make pain and other ways in which it tries to protect you from harm, so that we can identify all the different things that might be influencing your pain, and then potentially identify the opportunities whereby we might be able to influence those processes. Would it be okay with you if I explained how I understand the body to work, and from that sense?
Yeah, go for it.
Now, what I will do is I will start right from the start, because it's often good to make sure that we're on the same page over the whole page, rather than me making assumptions as to where you are and then jumping in and then finding out that actually we have different understandings of some earlier steps. So I might be teaching you to suck eggs at parts here, but hopefully it'll give you a full picture. So the general way that your body works is that you've got sensors throughout your body that live at the end of nerve fibres. And you've got some key types of sensors in your body. Now, we've got special ones for light in your eyes, but most of the other ones are for three things. So there are mechanical ones that look for pressure or stretch. There are thermal ones that look for hot or cold. And there are chemical ones that will look for smelly chemicals in your nose, tasty chemicals in your tongue, but also hormones are chemicals that your body makes that you will have sensors for. Inflammation has chemicals associated with it that you've got sensors for, or even if I put a chemical on my skin. So if you imagine if I put some deep heat on the outside of my finger there is a pepper inside that stimulates sensors.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Now each sensor has its own level or amount of stimulation it needs before it gets activated, and some sensors have very low thresholds and others have very high, and everything in between. That allows us to perceive the intensity of whatever stimulation they're looking for. Once a sensor is activated, it will send information into your body. And then once it arrives in your body, you have to interpret what that means. Okay, and then based upon that interpretation, you will decide what to do, and usually that will involve some form of action, but also a perception. So our awareness of what's going on. So if we go back to that example of putting the deep heat or the tiger balm that's got the pepper in it on my skin, that actually the sensors that look for that chemical are on the end of nerve cells that normally look for hot stuff. And so when that information arrives in the body, it interprets there's something hot on the outside of my finger. And so what it does as a result of that is it creates the perception of a hot finger, but also it takes action to get rid of excessive heat. And so it will dilate my blood vessels there to get rid of that heat. And so that's an effective way of responding to that stimulation. Now, as a process, that's really good, but it's quite processor heavy because it's always feedback loops for using that, and it's a little bit slow. So a lot of the time what your body is doing is it's using what it already knows to predict what's going on, and then it's deciding what to do based upon that prediction.
Okay.
But because that prediction results in actions and experiences, those will all then stimulate sensors, and that enables the system in real time to update what it knows. And so that's a much more efficient process because it's using what it already has access to rather than having to process that whole gambit of information. So that's very efficient as a system, but it does create the opportunity for prediction errors. So if we imagine with my deep heat, well then when I look at my finger, it looks red. If I feel it with my other hand, it feels warm. So that confirms to me that that deep heat has warmed my finger. Whereas actually I have warmed my finger by dilating those blood vessels, and not only that, that loses heat because that's the way that process works.
Yeah.
And so it's actually giving me some deep cooling rather than some deep heating. Okay, so how all that relates to pain is that, for a start, many of those sensors live in tissues throughout your body. Okay, but regardless, some of those sensors have quite high activation thresholds, and so they are there to look for potentially dangerous levels of stimulation. Okay, and so they will then feed that information into your body, and your system has to work out at that point in time whether or not you're in danger. And so it'll certainly use that information in terms of its intensity and location, those sorts of things, but it's also going to use what it knows. And so it's going to ask, well, what's happening right now? What's the situation that I'm in? What's my experience of being here in the past? What was I expecting was going to happen? It's also going to ask, well, what's it mean? Might it be something really bad? Might it have a really bad impact on my day, my week, my life? Might it be nothing? And also, how am I right now? Okay, and so that's going to be thinking about things like your health. So if you've got other major health challenges going on, that might influence how dangerous that danger feels. But even if you've slept poorly or you haven't been eating well, that might all influence how your body is in a position to react on any given day. How you're feeling. So if, for instance, you were angry, then you're already under threat. And so new threat might be more threatening than if you're relaxed and calm. How your relationships and connections are at that point in time, and however you explore, express, or experience your spirituality. All of those things are part of whom you are and how you are at any given point in time, and so they're all going to be relevant to that decision as to whether or not this is dangerous. And a lot of the time, the system will say, actually, I don't think this is that dangerous, and you don't need so much of that information. And if that happens, you won't be aware of it, and there's actually lots of danger signals going up your spinal cord all the time that you're not aware of, because the system says, don't worry, no problem, carry on. But if the system says, yes, I think there's a risk that you are in danger, it will then ask, well, is this a priority right now? So if you imagine, say, if I'm walking down to the dairy to buy an ice cream in my bare feet, and I stand on something sharp. So a very small group of high threshold danger sensors in my foot will say, hey, danger, a lot of pressure under the foot. And so the system will say, okay, what's happening? I'm in bare feet. There is actually often broken glass around here. I've trodden on broken glass and cut my foot before. I knew I was being a bit lazy by not wearing my shoes. What's it mean? Well, it means that I'll likely bleed on the dairy floor. They don't like that. And I was going to go to the beach this afternoon, and having a cut foot won't make that experience any more agreeable. How am I? I'm pretty good, thank you. So at that point in time, is that a priority? Well, to be honest with you, dairy's not about to shut, and I don't really need the ice cream. So that would certainly be a priority to respond to. But we could have exactly the same situation where I'm same barefoot, the same sharp thing, but I'm running to save my child before they run in front of a car. At that point in time, that really would not be a priority, and the system might not just wind down the information I get, but it might stop it altogether until that priority changes. So once I've got the child back on the footpath, maybe I take them to the dairy to get the ice cream, and then when I look down and see that I've bled on the dairy floor, that's when not only will that priority change, but I'll probably start to get angry as well.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does, it does.
So, if it is a danger and it's a priority to do something about, what the system will do is it will take steps to protect you. Okay, which is a sensible thing to do at that point in time. Now, what it does will be a combination of perceptions and actions. Okay, and so if we look at that, one of the things that it does, where will we go? Let's go there, is it will make pain. Okay, so pain is what your body makes when it predicts that you're in danger and then it's a priority to protect you from that.
That makes sense.
Makes sense? Often people think pain is made out here and fed into the body, but actually it comes out as a response to a need to protect. But it's only one of the perceptions the system will make to protect you. It will also make stiffness if it thinks that something shouldn't move so much. It could make stretch if it thinks that something has moved far enough. It could make tingle if it thinks that there is nervous tissue that is at risk. It could make itch if it thinks you're being eaten. It could make fatigue if it thinks what you need to protect are your energy reserves. And I could go on with that list for a much longer for that. But it will also take some key actions. And some of your most powerful protector organs are your muscles. Okay? But muscles can only do two things. They can contract or they can not contract. Okay, and they can gradate between those. So if you imagine as I'm standing on my sharp thing, there'll be some of my muscles that contract really quickly and others that don't contract really quickly to allow me to suddenly get my foot off there.
Yeah.
If instead I ruptured my cruciate ligament in my knee playing football, well then the system might make a decision that's not safe to load that structure at the moment, and the best thing it can do to protect is to not contract any of those muscles, and my leg will give way.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, so it's not that my cruciate ligament's the only thing that holds my leg up, but if the muscles don't hold my leg up, I've got no options.
Yeah.
And it might be that if it thinks I've done something bad to my back, that the muscles all around in my stomach and my back contract at the same time to stop me moving as a way to try and protect that structure. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, we can also change the way that you breathe. Few more options here. We can breathe faster, we can have larger or lesser volumes, we can hold our breath. So if I need to protect myself from a tiger that's stalking me, I might hold my breath. And also if I want to make my trunk more stiff to protect me from movement or load, then I might hold my breath. Versus if I need to run to grab my daughter, then I'm going to breathe a lot faster as I'm doing that. We'll also change the hormones that it makes. So particularly adrenaline and cortisol are very effective at activating our protective systems in our body. So our ability to be able to fight or flee a situation. And also, it will alter the sensitivity of the system so that it can control its access to information.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
So as a system that is necessary, vital, and beautiful in terms of how efficient it is at handling information, how quickly it's able to react, and how many options it has available to it to protect us. But because of the way that we have evolved, we are very focused on protecting ourselves, and sometimes that can be to the exclusion of doing things that would add value to our lives. So if we think about it, if the system is potentially contracting our muscles a lot to protect us from movement and making a lot of pain, the combination of those two is likely to mean that we are less able to participate in movement and activity.
Yeah, okay.
Okay? Which may be very protective for these tissues. However, it might also limit our participation in a whole range of things that normally help to maintain our physical, emotional, social, and spiritual health. But it might also result in us having less access to new data that can update what we know. And so the system can get stuck in making the same predictions because it's got no information to tell it to do something different.
It's blocking out any new...
Well, it doesn't have access to because you're not able to do them.
Right, yeah. Okay. That makes sense.
But also, if your muscles are working much harder than normal, that's actually going to put more load on sensors, and you're going to have to work harder. So you tire out more easily than you would normally. And if those muscles are working particularly hard, they might start to activate their own danger sensors, and so you get a new source of information into the system. If there are prolonged changes in how you're breathing, that tends to make the nervous system more sensitive. And similarly, if there are prolonged changes in the hormones, those stress hormones, that will also tend to make the system more sensitive. And so if the nervous system is more sensitive, what that means is it takes less danger in order to activate those danger sensors. And also the amount of information that might be sent up the chain for each time a danger sensor is activated might be greater.
Okay.
So you can get a great amplification of how much danger information is arriving for the system to have to decide and prioritise.
Sort of positive feedback and all sorts of different mechanisms.
Yep. And then, you have to, as you navigate the health system, there are theories that might be thrown up about what's causing your problem, and they may suggest to the system that this is bad. And so if what's happening is not good, well, that's likely to make that information interpreted as being more dangerous. Or if over time it has, a large impact on what you're able to do in your life, well, that reinforces that it's not very good. But also, if it means that it starts to feel different, particularly if, it's feeling vulnerable, well, that means that doing things is more dangerous. And so the system might therefore interpret the information from the danger sensors as being more dangerous than previously. And then in addition to that, it might start to focus more on those areas so that it can do a better job of protecting them. And so there are a range of different factors within the system that all contribute to it becoming more sensitive over time, less able to access information that suggests that maybe you don't need to be protected, and handles that information differently that can result in you being protected at lower and lower levels of stimulation or load. And I think that's what your experience suggests, where it took initially 100 kilometres of cycling before you got these symptoms, then it happened after 40 kilometres, and now those symptoms will come on after 4 to 6 kilometres of cycling.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Does that make sense?
It does.
So I guess then where we're left is, well, what does that leave us with opportunities for what we might do to help the system get that new data that gives it the opportunity to reframe or to be curious about whether or not what it knows is right, or whether there's the opportunity to update it.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, and so, some of that you've started. So already it seems like, that disc hypothesis has been relatively discounted.
Yeah.
Okay, you've tested things, you've also tested posture as well. Sorry, but that didn't seem to make much difference. As you've decreased the load, that hasn't really changed what you feel. As you're taking medication for inflammation, it hasn't really fixed the problem. So those hypotheses, we don't think, the bad stuff, we can't find any evidence of it, and so we can start to reassure the system that actually this looks like it's not due to an injury that won't get better. Okay? But in addition to that, we can think about, okay, well, what happens if we better match your contractions to the demands? So those muscles are doing a better job of matching the performance demand, but not overcooking it to protect you from movement more than you need to be.
Right, yeah.
Okay, so then it takes a little bit less effort to do stuff, and there's a little bit less load, and so you're able to do more before it feels like it might be overloading. Certainly in your case, there seemed to be a reasonable amount of evidence that the nervous system was operating in a more sensitive way. And so particularly things like the fact that often when you did something, your pain was worse, like cycling after you cycled rather than whilst the load was there, and that pain persisted for a long time after the load went. And so that pattern of flare-ups is very consistent with a sensitized nervous system, but also we found that we couldn't move your nervous system very far before you got symptoms from that, which would suggest that that's got a mechanical sensitivity to it.
Yeah.
And so if we think about from decreasing the sensitivity of the nervous system, well, these are things like, breathing can be a really good way of calming that down, but it might also be other relaxation techniques, might be meditative type practice, might be mindfulness. So those are all good for calming the system, as is exercise. And you've already had experience that when you are able to find a way of exercising that doesn't flare up, that has a positive impact on making that system a little bit less sensitive.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, because one of the problems we have in the health system is invariably it focuses just on problems and solutions in the tissues of your body, and that ignores all of these other opportunities or these other factors that are important for influencing how you feel as well as your health. And so it might often not solve the problem. So what it means though is that anything you can do that helps you to gain health, makes you feel better, increases your connection to those who you enjoy being with, increases your spiritual health, all of those things will make you feel better. And so they're worth doing just on their own.
Yeah.
However, they might also help the system to feel safer and therefore be less reactive to that information coming through. And then I guess it's worth us trying to think, well, how can we test some of those other questions the system has about, is my back vulnerable? And so that we can find ways that we can give it access specifically to the data to help it come to an understanding as to whether or not your back could become vulnerable despite it not having had a traumatic injury. And whether there are other places where the system can shift its focus to, which means it's spending less time looking for the problems in the tissues.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does. It's complex and there's a lot to it, but if you break it down piece by piece like you have, you can see how it links together.
Yeah, and I think the important bit is if we can get it on a page to start with and it makes sufficient sense to both of us, then we can use it as a guide for one, building on, because this is just on my limited exposure to your story, and you'll have a lot more information that might populate this, and you can reflect on that after today and think through different areas where you think might be important, but also allows you to have a look through and think which bits of these potential solutions feel like they might be of most value to you, and then we can think about, well, what are the opportunities for us to implement those in your rehabilitation.
Yeah, okay.
What questions do you have?
None come to mind now. There is a lot there, and yeah, I will have a read through this at some point and see what comes up, because there will be stuff.
Yeah, what I'd really encourage you to do is write down the questions you have, either on here or on the reverse side, and bring that back the next time we catch up, because that'll be a much more effective way of us trying to make sense of it all. Than if you're just trying to remember the next time you hear the bits that might or might not have made sense.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Excellent. So I will give that to you, and I look forward to hearing what sense you've made of it next time we catch up.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you.